He didn't even make it home from the hospital, said Randall, the family's attorney, eyes low. The ownership transfer went through 20 minutes after the time of death. I didn't respond. I just closed the folder and promised myself this wouldn't end the way they planned. My name is Julian DeLuca. I'm 36 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the next in line to lead Oravi Cosmetics, the company my father built from nothing but debt, vision, and his mother's kitchen sink. I wasn't handed a seat at the table, I earned it. While my friends were in college parties, I was in supply chain meetings in Colombia and R&D trials in San Diego. I spent my 20s flying coach with 2 suits in my carry-on, pitching eco-friendly packaging before it was trending. My father, Salvatore DeLuca, was a warhorse. An immigrant from Naples, he came to Miami with a barber's license and left a mark on the beauty industry that no one saw coming. He believed in texture, in nature, in authenticity. Skin remembers what you put on it, he used to say. Oravi became a billion-dollar name because he believed that beauty was healing, not marketing. I grew up behind the counters of beauty expos, watching stylists cry after trying our hydrating serum. That's what we sold. Transformation. But somewhere along the line, he changed. After my mother died, he remarried Vivian Hart, a former beauty consultant with sharp eyes and a sharper agenda. I didn't trust her from day one. She was too polished, too rehearsed. She called me Jules to sound close, even though I'd never introduced myself that way. But my father, he was enamored, blinded by late-life romance and the idea that someone finally understood him. I tried to stay close, took on more operational roles, started restructuring our digital channels, prepared to take over, and for a while it felt like we were aligned. He'd say, "When the time comes, Julian, it's yours." All of it. But time ran out faster than anyone expected. A stroke took him down in February. He never regained speech. For 5 weeks, I was in and out of the hospital, managing updates, keeping the board calm, protecting what little control I still had. Vivian, she barely visited. When she did, it was with lawyers. She smiled at nurses like it was a press tour. And then, he died. Quiet. No ceremony, no closure. The next morning, she froze my access to company servers, changed the locks on the executive wing, called an emergency board meeting without me. And that's when Randall, our longtime family lawyer, handed me a folder. Inside, a clean transfer of majority shares, executed 20 minutes after my father's time of death, signed electronically, authenticated by board proxies aligned with her. She'd planned it. She waited until he couldn't speak, and she moved everything under her name. But here's the thing about growing up inside a business like Oravi. You learn where the skeletons are buried, and I had just started digging. Oravi didn't start with capital. It started with a recipe. My grandmother used to make a hair cream using avocado oil and rosemary. She grew on the back porch. My father bottled it in mason jars, printed labels on a home printer, and sold them out of a barber shop in Little Havana. That was 1989. By 2005, we were in salons across 5 states. By 2015, we were in over 40 countries. But it wasn't magic. It was work, grit, choices. I helped scale the e-commerce operation from a side tab on our website to 30% of total revenue. I rewrote distribution deals, cut waste by 18%, and brought in sustainable packaging years before the competition. When everyone else was chasing influencer hype, I built our brand on loyalty, real stories, and client results. Oravi became a household name not because of aggressive expansion, but because of soul. And a big part of that soul was me, which is why what happened next cut deeper than any business betrayal. The first sign came wrapped in politeness. An internal review of my digital department, initiated by an external consultant I hadn't hired. They said it was to optimize structure. Suddenly, my access to campaign data was restricted. Then came the quiet removal from leadership group chats, followed by calendar invites mysteriously disappearing from my schedule. I asked questions. Vivian smiled. "It's just temporary, darling. You've been under so much pressure. Take some time to breathe." That's when I knew. They weren't reviewing my performance. They were rehearsing my exit. Behind the scenes, she moved fast. One of the senior board members, a man who'd once carried inventory boxes with my father, suddenly began echoing her buzzwords. Modernize, streamline, reduce emotional equity. What did that even mean? And then came Leaf, a new strategic advisor brought in by Vivian. Young, polished, MBA, spoke more in charts than in sentences. He gave me this look, not disrespectful, just like I was analog in a digital world, like I was sentimental baggage attached to an outdated brand. Meetings I once led were now narrated by him, my ideas. Interesting, but not aligned with the new positioning. Vivian took over PR. She scheduled a brand relaunch, rebranded the DeLuca legacy into a minimalist logo with a French tagline. Gone was our family seal. Gone was the gold my father used to insist on in every package. I was asked to support from the side, and then I wasn't asked anything at all. On the morning of the investor summit, I arrived to find my badge deactivated. Security let me in out of familiarity. My name wasn't on the agenda. Vivian walked past me in a white pantsuit like I was a former vendor. She took the stage and called herself co-founder emeritus, and no one stopped her. But I watched. I smiled, because while they were rehearsing my funeral, I was already drafting the autopsy. I didn't shout. I didn't post cryptic messages online. I didn't even call Vivian. I just disappeared. Outwardly. Inwardly, I went to war. I hired Eleanor Reyes, a forensic accountant I met years ago when Aravi was acquiring a lab in Phoenix. Brilliant, discreet, dangerous. I handed her a list. Payment authorizations, board votes, company logs. Everything that felt off in the last 60 days. She didn't blink. She just said, "Give me 2 weeks." Meanwhile, I flew to Tallahassee and met with Sam Braddock, a regulatory contact I'd helped once during a messy recall scandal. Over lunch, I told him about irregular filings, suspicious transfers, and an inheritance shift executed electronically the same hour my father died. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked if he wanted a closer look. Back home, I visited Ricardo, our former warehouse supervisor. Retired, loyal. I asked him if he remembered a missing shipment from February, one my father had been investigating right before his stroke. He did. Had copies. Stored everything, just in case. By the end of the week, I had documents, voice memos, patterns, and then one of Vivian's closest allies, board member Janice Lau, reached out in secret. "I think you should know," she said, her voice shaking. "Vivian's been moving funds through shell accounts, and not alone." That was the crack I needed. The silence was over. The reckoning had begun. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from Talia Monroe, CEO of Verdance Group, one of the most respected sustainability investment firms in the U.S. Elegant, sharp, and famously allergic to corporate theater. We met once at a clean beauty summit in Chicago, years ago. I helped her team navigate a supply chain crisis. No press, no credit, just impact. Now she was offering me a deal. "Julian," she said, "we've been watching what's happening at Aravi. Quiet chaos. And we believe what's been taken from you needs to be rebuilt, not just reclaimed." She wanted to fund a full-scale alternative brand, built on Aravi's original formulas and values. Same vision, same roots, but cleaner, louder, freer. "You don't need revenge," she said. "You need return." I almost said yes. But then Eleanor called. She had everything. Emails linking Vivian and Leif to offshore accounts. Paper trails showing forged timestamps. Transfers in Salvatore DeLuca's name, executed after his death. And one voice memo, recorded by accident. Vivian's voice. Clear. Cold. By the time that boy realizes what happened, we'll have buried the paperwork, the board, and his last name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I forwarded the files to Randall, the family attorney, then to Sam Braddock at the Department of Financial Oversight, and finally, to Talia Monroe. Then I waited. The first domino fell on a Monday. Leif was arrested at his condo in Brickell. By Wednesday, a federal inquiry was announced live on Bloomberg. Thursday, Vivian's assets were frozen. The woman who once walked past me like I was dust in her designer win now walked into a courtroom in handcuffs, hiding behind oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf. And the board? One by one, they folded. Janice Lau turned witness. 2 members resigned. The press called it the fall of the cosmetic queen. But I wasn't done. I stood in front of the boardroom at Oravi, the same one I used to be locked out of, and presented a legal reinstatement motion backed by shareholder confidence, legal precedent, and federal testimony. They voted unanimously. Oravi was mine again. But I didn't take her back out of pride. I took her back to reset the legacy, to restore my father's name, and to make sure no one like Vivian would ever touch this brand again. The headlines hit faster than I expected. From power suit to prison, the fall of Vivian Hart, beauty empire rocked by posthumous fraud scheme. Feds confirm shares were stolen hours after founder's death. Every outlet wanted a statement. I gave none. The facts spoke louder. Vivian's entire digital footprint was torn apart by investigators. What began as suspicious activity escalated into a full-blown criminal conspiracy. Embezzlement, identity misuse, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice. She had moved over $19 million across shell entities, signed 3 authorizations in Salvatore's name after his death, and coerced 2 board members into silence with private blackmail material. Leif turned on her within 48 hours, claimed he was just following strategy. His statement was weak, but useful. By week 2, 3 more executives were indicted. Randall, the lawyer who'd once handed me the folder of betrayal, was now helping the DOJ draft formal charges. Eleanor, my quiet genius, became the backbone of the forensic report presented to the federal court. And the old staff? Silent, watching, some shocked, some relieved. Vivian's mugshot leaked. It went viral. Gone was the pristine woman in the white pantsuit. In her place, hollow eyes, messy hair, and the unmistakable face of a woman who thought no one would catch her. I didn't rejoice. I didn't need to, because every room that used to ignore my voice was now echoing with one word: DeLuca. Oravia's market value dipped briefly and then surged. Clients returned. Vendors sent handwritten notes. Old employees asked to come back. Even competitors publicly acknowledged our restoration of trust. And Vivian? She was denied bail. Her trial was set for the following quarter. The maximum sentence would be 22 years. I didn't care how long. I just cared that the story was no longer hers to tell. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, in atmosphere. It was the kind of silence that feels rehearsed, clean, sanitized. But I knew what was coming. On the second day of the hearing, the prosecution submitted Exhibit 47A, a private voice memo recovered from Vivian's phone. It had been deleted, but not permanently. Her voice filled the room. The old man was slipping. We just gave the empire a nudge. Julian? He's sweet, but soft. He won't fight. He'll cry, then vanish, just like his mother did. That hit harder than I expected. The gallery went silent. Even the judge blinked, because in one sentence she hadn't just exposed her plan, she exposed her contempt. Contempt for my loyalty, for my grief, for the family that had taken her in. That night I went home and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside, a handwritten note from my father, dated 2 weeks before his stroke. It read, "Julian, if anything ever happens and things don't look right, talk to Randall and check the holding file. Trust your instinct. I see you. I believe in what you're building." I never knew that note existed. Randall never mentioned it. I called him immediately. He choked up, said Salvatore had left it just in case. The next morning, Randall submitted new evidence, a holding agreement signed by my father, transferring his controlling shares to me in the event of medical incapacitation. The document had been buried in a storage drive, but time-stamped and legally valid. Vivian knew. That's why she rushed to falsify her own version. 20 minutes after he died, it all connected now. The forced restructuring, the erased agendas, the forged transfers. It wasn't incompetence, it was a slow-motion coup, staged while my father was still breathing, but the system held. Vivian was now facing 8 felony charges. Leif had pled guilty and taken a deal. Two board members were permanently barred from holding executive roles in any US-based corporation. As for me, I wasn't broken. I was seen by the court, by the public, by the company my father bled for. More than anything, I was finally validated. Everything I feared, everything I suspected, it was real. And now, it was documented. Not as paranoia, as truth. I didn't walk back into Aurovie like a victor. I walked in like a builder. The carpets were the same, the walls untouched. But everything else, it was mine to reset. The first thing I did was remove every trace of corporate vanity. No mission statement posters, no meaningless slogans. I replaced them with framed photos of our original lab. My father mixing formulas in a borrowed salon sink. My grandmother labeling jars by hand. Then I reopened the doors that had been locked, figuratively and literally. Departments that had been suffocated by red tape were invited back to the table. R&D, marketing, customer care. I didn't ask for reports. I asked for opinions. And when they spoke, I listened. People cried in those first few meetings. Some hadn't been asked what they thought in years. Next, I called the suppliers, not the account managers, the founders. Small farms in Colorado, botanical extract labs in Maine. I told them, the people who stole this brand are gone. We're back to building it together. One of them replied, "Took you long enough, Julian." I laughed. For the first time in months, it felt real. Then I went deeper. I dismantled every system Vivian installed. Her dashboards, her toxic incentive plans, her cold robotic communication funnels. Gone. In their place, a single principle. Value is personal. If you can't connect to someone's story, you don't belong in our brand. And slowly, the numbers followed. Revenue started climbing. Not from gimmicks, but from loyalty. Clients who had left came back. Former competitors reached out for partnerships. And the press? They shifted their tone from scandal to admiration. The DeLuca revival. How purpose reclaimed a brand hijacked by power. But I didn't need headlines. I needed peace. So I took the final step. I founded the Salvatore Institute, an educational fund and mentorship platform for immigrant founders in the beauty and wellness industry. First-generation entrepreneurs with dreams and no investors. Because that's how we started. And that's where legacy begins again. On the day we relaunched Aurovie's full brand line, I stood in the same warehouse where my father used to tape boxes by hand. I looked at our new team, diverse, young, old, seasoned, fresh, and I said just one thing. This time, it's not about reclaiming power. It's about protecting the people who never should have been cut out of it. 3 months after Aurovie's full relaunch, I received a formal invitation from Avera Holdings, a global conglomerate known for acquiring purpose-driven brands and scaling them to global dominance. I expected a generic acquisition pitch. What I got was a seat at the global integration table. The offer was clear. Join the Avera Executive Board. Lead a new unit focused on sustainable beauty across Latin America and Southern Europe. Access to funding, research and development infrastructure, a global network. But there was a condition. Aurovie would become the blueprint, the cultural model, the foundation for the new unit's entire philosophy. They weren't just offering me a title. They were offering me the pen to write a new chapter for the industry. I met with their board in New York. Tall windows, cold air. Lawyers in silence. When they finished their presentation, I closed the folder and looked them in the eye. Here are my terms. Aurovie remains autonomous in leadership and direction. The Salvatore Institute becomes a funded partner in their entrepreneurship initiatives. No former Belamonte, Vivian-related, or compromised executive anywhere near the expansion. They paused, then nodded. The room shifted, not out of fear, out of respect, because they didn't just want a brand, they wanted a standard. One built on something stronger than projections, built on story, scars, and survival. After the meeting, I walked down 6th Avenue alone. No entourage, no cameras. And I smiled, not because I'd won, because I had rewritten the rules of the game, without ever playing dirty. The building hadn't changed. Same parking garage, same palm trees outside, same receptionist who used to glance at me like I didn't belong. Now she stood up the moment I walked in. Mr. DeLuca, she said almost in a whisper. Welcome back. I was there for the first joint strategy session between Orvi and Avera, same office where I was once locked out. Same conference room where Vivian announced herself as co-founder. Same hallway where my father used to tell me, you don't need the loudest voice. You need the last word. And here I was. No fanfare, no press, no revenge speech, just presence. Inside the boardroom, every seat was filled. Global directors, R&D leads, market analysts. I walked to the head of the table. No one needed to be told why. I set down my folder, looked at the faces, some familiar, some brand new, and I led the meeting. Clear, calm, confident. Not because I had to prove anything, because now they listened. Afterward, I stayed behind a moment, walked through the executive wing alone, passed by the office that used to have Vivian's name on the door. It now read, Client Experience and Culture, occupied by a former warehouse clerk I personally promoted. That's how you win, not by dragging others down, but by lifting the right ones up. I left the building without a word, but the silence that followed me said everything. I used to think legacy was something you left behind. Now I know. Real legacy walks beside you. Every Friday, I spend my mornings at the Salvatore Institute, mentoring young founders who remind me of who I was before the storm. Nervous, brave, hungry. They don't call me sir, they call me Julian. One of them, a Dominican-American chemist named Camilla, pitched a product line so bold it made me pause. I invited her to shadow me for a week. By Monday, she was pitching at a roundtable with Avera's R&D team. She nailed it. And as we left the room, she looked at me and asked, do you think people like us really stand a chance? I smiled. Not only do you stand a chance, you're the reason we rebuilt everything. Because what they tried to bury wasn't just me, it was everything we stood for. Now, it's taking root again, everywhere. They tried to erase my name with silence. But silence doesn't erase what's real. It only delays the moment the truth steps forward. And when it does, it doesn't need to scream. It just stands there, unshaken. Because what's built with roots survives the storm.